Hello, and welcome to my presentation based off of my research study, Barriers to Creating a Safe Space for LGBT Students. My name is Riley Long, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm really excited to present this to you today. This is a topic that is close to my heart, so I really hope that you enjoy listening to the presentation. This was a qualitative research study where I asked 8 teachers a set of 6 interview questions at Leawood Middle School, which is located in Johnson County in Kansas. This is the school that I've been teaching at the past 3 years. So they were teachers that I was pretty familiar with. They were asked open-ended questions related to their experience with LGBT curriculum and the community and just experiences they had with students since they had started teaching. The teachers reported barriers to being able to provide an inclusive classroom experience, and that's what we will kind of dive into more in this presentation, is looking at what those barriers are and how they were able to potentially overcome them in their teaching. The statement of the problem is there are many practices that can be put into place for LGBT students to feel comfortable in the classroom, but there are many barriers to prevent educators from being openly affirming to students. This topic is important to me because I identify as part of the LGBT community, and knowing how hard it is to just be myself within the schools, I knew that it must be very difficult for students to be themselves as well. I went to school in the Blue Valley School District, and I don't remember ever really hearing anything about the LGBT community. And given this was at least 15 years ago that I was in high school, so I really wanted to see if that kind of climate was still happening within the schools or if there had been change made. So my question was, what are the barriers that prevent teachers from creating an LGBT inclusive classroom? I already had quite a bit of prior knowledge when forming my hypothesis, especially just being a teacher in the district the last few years and not really hearing about these topics or even having any type of training or mention of them. So my hypothesis was lack of education and training will prevent teachers from creating an inclusive classroom for LGBT students. Like I mentioned before, I am a part of the LGBT community. I identify as trans myself, so it's a difficult life to live just in general, especially within a Midwestern area of the United States, and just being an adult is already hard, so I know it's even more difficult for students. And it really breaks my heart because there are so many students in this community that are bullied and are really unable to succeed because they are still really not given the equality that they deserve, whether that's the way that they're treated or the rights they have. There's been a lot of radical don't say gay and anti-trans legislation bills going on in the last couple of years, which has made it even more difficult for these students to be themselves and be out and proud in the classroom. This leads to a lot of student isolation, and even worse than that, the LGBT rate of suicide for youth is really, really high, especially for trans youth. So this study is incredibly, incredibly important to help this community begin to succeed and see how we can start doing that within our classrooms each day. So hopefully I haven't already lost you with the terms that I've been using, but let's go over a quick definition of terms. The first one being LGBT. This is a term that I'll use pretty frequently throughout my paper and my presentation. So that's going to stand for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community. I put the etc. there because there's so many other letters in this community. Sometimes you'll hear LGBTQ, LGBTQIA+. The Q would refer to queer or questioning. The I would be intersex. The A would be asexual. Sometimes I just say alphabet soup because there's so many different ways to identify in this community, but for this, I really will stick with just LGBT to represent that community. The next term, coming out, refers to sharing your identity with maybe just a person or with a group of people. And that could look like coming out to a teacher, telling them that you are gay, or posting on social media that you are starting to use a different pronoun and you're identifying as trans. I've asked teachers about this in this study, and that's really asking them about if a student has personally come up to them and said that they are gay or bisexual, or that they are using a different set of pronouns that are provided by the school's paperwork. And then ally is someone who supports this community. I like to say that allies truly are needed to be vocal, so that's not just putting a rainbow sticker on your laptop and saying you're done. That is being out there with the LGBT community, fighting the fight, being a vocal ally, and doing what you can to change policy and change legislation. So I use this term in this presentation to refer to really the 8 teachers that I interviewed. I put this out as a voluntary interview with my staff, so I assume that most of these staff members are already allies to the LGBT community before they started the interview process. I used 11 different sources in this research study for my review of literature, and that was different policies, potentially in school districts, journal articles, and one of the main things that I used was the GLSEN National Climate Survey, and that's GLSEN stands for Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. Every year they put out a survey to students to see how rates of bullying and just different inclusive practices are going on within their school. And it's really interesting to look at the trends, how they change year by year. They've actually been reporting higher rates of suicide and higher rates of bullying than even in the past 5 years recently. So that's been really interesting to see kind of what those barriers are within the classroom that are reporting these rates. So it's reported in the 2021 National School Climate Survey that 68% of LGBTQ plus students felt unsafe at school because of their gender identity, their sexual orientation, which again is a really high number. More than half feel unsafe. When you're unsafe at school, it's very, very difficult to have learning occur. Another article that I wanted to share here talks about teachers having difficulty including these practices because of parents and administrators. A lot of fear lingers and causes teachers to not be sure how to approach the topic. And even worse, a lot of teachers don't have enough knowledge to feel confident enough talking about these things within their classroom. They don't have that professional development or training. And then, of course, like I said, lack of support around the topic too. So that's kind of what that second bullet point shared about in my review of literature. This next bullet point goes back to the GLSEN National Climate Survey. This is a really good resource if you're ever interested in looking it up. It is almost like a book of different statistics that, like I said, looks at the climate of schools. I highly suggest looking at it if you're interested. So this one says only 1/10 of LGBTQ plus students reported that school staff intervened. Most of the time or always when overhearing homophobic remarks at school, and less than 1/10 reported that school staff intervened most of the time or always when overhearing negative remarks about gender expression. This is a really, really low rate, and I know a lot of teachers will say it's hard when you hear it. It's a lot of times in the hallway, in the lockers, or at the lockers, and it's easy for those things to get passed by, but the future implications of those are really alarming, especially again looking at the bullying rates, the suicide rates. So there really has to be a change in making sure we're holding students accountable for saying these remarks and why are they saying them, looking at why is this kind of bullying happening and how can we change that in our school before we're even having to fix the homophobic remarks, is let's have the education beforehand. And that's kind of what this other bullet point talks about, is the policies within the schools. They have anti-bullying policies, which are wonderful and great, don't get me wrong, but it's just after the action has happened, what are we going to do? We need to focus less on what happens after the action and what can happen beforehand, how we can create an inclusive school environment. And we know this is not just for LGBT students, but race, religion, all of those different things can be talked about more in a way so that we have everyone feeling safer and feeling like they can just get along better and understand their differences. Similar to what I shared before, there are many barriers in schools that prevent teachers from even talking about the LGBT community. That could be district policies, fear of backlash from parents or administration, lack of knowledge. I know for myself, I fear just keeping my job in opening up about myself, let alone talking about these issues with my students. There really are no policies that say that I can't, but there's no policies that say that I can. And the fear of seeing articles in the news where other people have been fired or various things like that prevent me from really opening up about myself and talking about the community in general. The literature confirmed that LGBT students are at a high risk and that curriculum and professional development is not available for teachers to create an inclusive classroom. It's going to take more to create a safe space beyond what we're doing right now. My research design was a qualitative analysis of 6 interview questions to determine barriers teachers faced in providing LGBT topics in the classroom. This was 8 teachers that were interviewed at Leawood Middle School. This is a school, like I mentioned, in Johnson County in the Blue Valley School District. These teachers had been teaching anywhere from 6 to 40 years in the classroom. 4 of these teachers taught science, 1 taught math, 1 taught English, and 2 taught special education. I completed these interviews with the 8 teachers in my school. I started out by sending out an email to the whole staff, just asking if anybody was interested in interviewing on this topic. And then I usually met a teacher during our lunch break or a planned period within their private classroom and recorded the responses on my personal laptop. This took approximately 15 minutes for each interview. I mentioned earlier that these were open-ended questions, but many of the questions had similar responses, and those were tallied to show a trend in data and create a mean to analyze the data. I expressed the percentages to the interview questions in the presentation of data on the next slide. All right, so here is our data finally. So the first question was, how familiar are you with LGBT terms? And I just asked this to people. I didn't necessarily give them a quiz, and I wanted to make sure that they knew what that stood for. And most people said that they were somewhat knowledgeable. That was 62.5%. And then 37.5% felt that they were very, very knowledgeable on the terms, which again confirms that all of these teachers had some background knowledge and were probably allies to the community before this interview started. Next question is, have you ever had students come out to you before? So again, coming out, whether you're gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. 2 of 8 said yes, so that was 25%. They have had someone come out to them before. And then 75% shared no, which this was pretty shocking for me, especially in the middle and high school setting, not having a student that they knew identified that way or had ever shared that with them, especially with teachers that have been teaching for 40 years. What guidance has the district given you regarding LGBT issues? So that could be within a training or something within the superintendent or something like that. 2 of 8 shared that they had been in one training around LGBT issues. I remember one of these teachers said it was an online module that they had taken at some point in their career. And then 6 out of 8, or 75%, shared that they have never had a training on LGBT issues or any type of guidance on this, which, again, shocking when many teachers have been teaching for so long and for this topic to have never been brought up. Next, I wanted to look at within the schools what the guidance from the administration had been given to teachers regarding these issues. So this would be the building principal, the building vice principal, administration of that sort. So 1 of 8, so 12.5%, shared that administration has been very supportive when questions were asked or when teachers wanted to help a student who did not have supportive parents. So if the teacher went to the administration and had questions or didn't know where to go, they gave guidance. But a large majority, 87.5%, shared that there had never been any guidance. So it seems to me that at times there are certain administrators who maybe are a little more knowledgeable, and if you have a question, they might be able to steer you in the right direction. But there is no overall training or talking to teachers about navigating those issues as a classroom teacher. Then I wanted to see, did we talk about LGBT issues in our teaching programs, whether it was our bachelor's or our master's program? 8 out of 8 said no, there was not any training or courses related to those issues. And then the last question was, how often do you highlight LGBT people in your classroom? This would really be no surprise. 2 of 8 shared that they try to highlight LGBT voices when they can, not being sure exactly when or where they can, but that they really do try to be a good ally for the community. And then 6 out of 8 shared never. I remember a teacher in particular who's a science teacher and kind of wasn't sure how you would even integrate that into a science curriculum. And just knowing all the different things about genetics, and there's been discussions of science related to this community, it kind of breaks my heart to hear that there wouldn't be any background knowledge, especially coming from such a young teacher in this school. So my findings were, within this school in Johnson County, LGBT students are not being set up for success. They are not having teachers that they can go to, that they feel comfortable talking about themselves, and they are not getting a classroom experience that even mentions them. So there's likely a correlation between the lack of training and education for teachers. Again, we're looking at never having a course in college, very little training, maybe a little module that was taken online at some point in our teaching career, but no policies or procedures for working directly with LGBT students. And because we don't have those, there's not a way to create an inclusive classroom. And like I said, we're not being set up for success. We're not feeling safe as LGBT students, and really LGBT staff as well. I'll throw myself in there. So really just trying to see what change can we make so that we can reverse this and create more of an inclusive classroom for everybody. Going through my findings, it really frustrated me to see how little teachers knew and how little they were trying to incorporate these students into the classroom. But they really don't have any idea where to begin in doing this. And I know that a lot of teachers were worried about saying the wrong thing, using the wrong pronouns, that type of thing, which is something that I've experienced a lot. I feel like people sometimes think they need to walk on eggshells, and on the opposite side, then they just don't do anything at all, which doesn't help things advance. And I know there's a lot of feelings behind these issues, and it can be somewhat of a hot topic, so I don't really blame them, but kind of looking out, how can we take the first step in getting this to happen within our schools? In summary, my hypothesis was supported as teachers lacked resources to provide inclusive education and teachers were unsure where to access these resources. Having a position within the schools that is knowledgeable about this could be a really great first start. I know just even the social workers within the Blue Valley School District, I've done a training for them, have not really even the first thoughts as well as where to access these resources, when a lot of times we refer to social workers as helping this population of students. This study does support the literature review, the health promotion practices findings that teachers are not including this community because of the lack of professional development and district support. LGBT students will continue to fail in school, employment, and in mental health. This is true for youth. This is true for the LGBT community throughout their life. There are a lot of struggles that we face, and without any change, again, we really, really need the allies to help support us. There will not be movement forward for this community. The recommendations that I have for schools are, of course, adequate professional development. This is bringing in people from the community or professionals to talk about this. Maybe that includes therapists or mental health workers who would have practices that would help. But I think also just hearing from LGBT people and their experiences would help maybe give a story to what some of the students might be experiencing. There are inclusive curriculums provided online. I know the GLSEN has a lot of resources. Again, Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, the same people that put out the National Climate School Survey. So having some of these curriculum provided within the schools and, again, training how to use them would be very helpful. I think the biggest thing is clear policies. Within Blue Valley and within some of the school districts that I've worked in, there are not, everything kind of stays in the gray area. So in particular related to students' names and pronouns within schools, what they can use, what they can't use, and there is not an outline of exactly what can and can't happen. So without that, it's kind of left up to the building administrator to decide, and it can create a really uncomfortable position for many students. And I just don't think the districts are ready to create clear-cut policies because of the potential backlash from families and parents and even teachers. I mean, this is somewhat of a political issue in a way to certain people. So avoiding creating policies is going to avoid having people be upset. But until there are clear policies created, things will stay the same and they will not change for LGBT students. What I wrote at the end here is that these strategies are going to change lives. Looking at the suicide rate, like I said at the beginning, until we are doing these things, the LGBT community will continue to suffer. And we are prioritizing people's comfort level, parents' backlash over saving lives, changing lives. And to me, that's just a obvious decision right there where we should be moving forward. So we'll continue to fight the good fight. Allies will hopefully continue to have their voice be heard, and we will stand as a majority. And hopefully help these teachers have some strategies to create more of an inclusive classroom for their school that's so students can feel like themselves and can continue to have success in school, because when you're not able to be your authentic self, you really cannot do as well as you're meant to be in that classroom. So those are my recommendations for schools moving forward. I just wanted to thank you so much for listening to my presentation. If you ever have questions about anything, this is something, again, that's close to my heart, so feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to collaborate with others. So again, thanks so much for listening, and hopefully, like I said, we can continue creating a positive environment for LGBT students so we can see them truly succeed. Thanks so much.